And then, yeah, I can go ahead and start. All right. So I'll just introduce myself. I'm Kevin from the Lincolnwood Library, and I'm going to be going through some of my favorite books of the year. Not all of them are published in 2020, and I figured I would go through them roughly by age group. So I have a couple board books that I wanted to share. I don't think these are published in 2019 or 2020. So the first one is Richard Van Camp books. I read all of his. I think I own most of the ones that he has done. This is one of my favorites, which is called May We Have Enough to Share. I particularly like this one because the photos are so good. I can kind of see them. They're incredible photographs of just different families and different babies. And I think, like most babies, my child loves looking at pictures of other babies. And these photographs are just so vivid and have incredible detail, and you can just look at them for hours. So all of the books I would highly recommend from him. The other one that I have, this one is called Farm. And the reason I like this one and the other ones in this series are the textures and the different materials that they use. It almost feels like it's in 3 dimensions when you're reading it. It's a really simple book of just farm animals and kind of related words that go along with each picture. So there's not a lot of actual details for the words, but the pictures are really incredible. And that kind of goes along with the other board books have been kind of like interactive food books and the recipe books that we have in our board book sections. Those are also great as well. And then the middle grade one, especially in 2020, kind of being separated and wanting to learn things, but not wanting to be overwhelmed with information, I started reading these science comics, which have been great. This one I have not read. This is probably the one that I'll read next. This one is about crows, but I read one about sharks and bats that I particularly liked. It does a great job of going into pretty incredible detail about different animals, and they have things on other topics like dinosaurs and coral reefs and places, so it doesn't have to just be animals, but it does an incredible job of just going through really detailed topics and making them pretty presentable. So we have this in our juvenile graphic novel section, but I really enjoyed it and learned a lot. And then for the teen selection, kind of going away from comfort reads a little bit. Both of these books are a little bit darker, but they're both good. The first one is Dig, which I think came out in 2019 or 2020. I read this really early in the year. It kind of goes through this whole family through multiple generations, and you kind of find out all of these secrets throughout the book, and it kind of jumps back and forth in time and places, and you kind of don't always understand who the characters are at first. But as the book goes along, it just gets more and more in depth, and you get more invested, and kind of these big secrets just kind of start unraveling over a long period of time. So it's really cool. I love all of A.S. King's books. And then the other one was Sadie, which was a really fast-paced kind of thriller mystery novel. These are books that, while not always really happy, they're really engrossing and kind of great kind of escapist adventure mystery thriller kind of books are always good. And then I have a couple adult books. The one that I brought is the new one by Mike Birbiglia, which you can actually watch his kind of one-man show about this book on Netflix. I believe it's still up there. The one-man show stand-up special is about him becoming a dad, which is really relatable since I have a 1.5-year-old. And then he released this book along with the stand-up special with his wife, who's a poet. So it kind of goes between his essays and then his wife's poems about kind of their relationship into having a baby, and then just how that changed everything. So it's called The New One, Painfully True Stories from a Reluctant Dad. And even though I wasn't a reluctant dad, like, I think he does a really funny job of going through all of the different emotions that you feel when you have a kid and how everything changes. And yeah, there's just tons of emotions, from fear to laughter to how it impacts your relationship with his wife or partner. So it's really funny. He's a frequent kind of contributor to This American Life, and has a lot of other stand-up specials, and his wife's poems are really accessible as well. And then I do have one reread that I read, which I know, Emily, you reread this, I think, last year, is the Thursday Next series, which I read a long time ago. And it's by Jasper Fforde. I couldn't find any that were on the shelf in the library, but it's basically a detective novel throughout different really famous books throughout history. And it's an incredible series. And I know he has other ones that kind of all link together, like the Nursery Crimes series and other ones like that. So I'd highly recommend it. I had a professor in college that was really, really into these books and always related it back to, he taught British literature. So he would always connect things from this book into really old British literature from like the 1500s through the 1800s. So yeah, those were all of my books. So I had a lot of comfort reads, and then also just some other kind of deeper literature mixed in. So it was kind of definitely a different reading year for me. All right.
I love Jasper Fforde. He's so good.
I haven't read those books for many years, so I should.
So good. I reread the whole series maybe every couple of years. I think you're right, Kevin. I did do it last year. They're so good. I started reading and then started reading something else, and I lost his newest book is called The Constant Rabbit, which is a fable satire about like some event happens and rabbits become sentient in the world. And I was reading it, and then my Overdrive loan ended, and I haven't picked it back up again, but he's just such a fun author.
Yeah, there's so many books that all tie together, which is really cool. And I feel like it's a book that lends itself to reading multiple times. And
oh, definitely. Definitely. Though I think I've never read any of those classics that are mentioned in the book, like Jane Eyre or Wuthering Heights or Great Expectations. I've never read any of those. And so reading the Jasper Fforde books that are so entwined with those classics, part of me feels like I'm missing something because I don't have the original source material knowledge in my head. But also reading the Jasper Fforde series, I'm like, no, I'm good. I don't need to read those classics. I have enough exposure through this book series.
You're good to skip some of those. Don't skip Jane Eyre, though. You should do Jane Eyre. Wuthering Heights, you're good to skip, though.
Yeah, it does a great job of making fun of those books while also
even Hamlet. I've never read Hamlet, but the fourth Jasper Fforde book, Hamlet is a central character, and because he basically becomes apprentice / shadows the main character Thursday Next, and the whole book just makes fun of how indecisive he is and how just Hamlet in general. And I had to go and read a Cliff's Notes of Hamlet because I was I'm missing a lot here. But super good. I guess I can go next.
Awesome.
So in looking at just my best of 2020 list overall, there's definitely like this theme of survival, and definitely like survival books and horror are my favorite genre. And it really makes sense that 2020 had like the top books for me were all in that genre. So I'm going to start at the bottom and go up to my best of. I'm going to start with a picture book, which isn't really a survival book, but it could be if you really stretch your imagination. It's called A Polar Bear in the Snow. It's by Mac Barnett and Sean Harris. And I've been a longtime follower of Mac Barnett, but one of the amazing things that he was doing in quarantine when it first started was he started a book club show on Instagram, and it has followers of the book club and members of the book club in literally all 7 continents. And one of the books that he wrote, A Polar Bear in the Snow, and the illustrator is his best friend and racquetball enemy, Sean Harris, was featured on the book club show many times because it was, a partnership between the two friends. But it's just this beautiful story about a polar bear in the snow. The illustrations are incredible. Sean Harris has several little videos of how he made the illustrations on his Instagram, which is really cool. I love seeing the process of illustrators making their art. And I love bears. So this is like a clear winner for me for 2020. I'm gonna kind of go in best of order, but also in age order. So a middle grade novel that I loved is They Threw Us Away, which is the first book in the Teddy's saga. And I think the best way to summarize this book is through one of the publisher copy lines on it, is that it's Lord of the Flies meets Toy Story. Basically, this teddy bear wakes up in a dump and is trying to figure out what has happened to him. He comes across several other teddy bears that have also been discarded, and they're trying to find their home. So they are navigating through this dump. There's all sorts of other crazy things, like think Toy Story 3, sort of like the dumpster kind of scenes. But also, if you know Daniel Krauss at all, you know that this is a very visceral, kind of gritty book, but it's his first middle grade book, which is really exciting. And the cover for the second one was revealed yesterday. And it's going to be an amazing 3-book series. They Threw Us Away. The next one that I read that I really liked in 2020 was by Minnie McGinnis, who's one of my favorite YA authors. It's called Be Not Far From Me. And I actually read this book. It's a survival story about a girl who gets lost in the wilderness. And I read this book on my first ever solo camping trip, which seems like maybe not the greatest pairing, but it was a really great read anyways. So basically the main character is at a party with her friends, and she's drinking, and she stumbles across her boyfriend kissing another girl. She gets very upset and runs off into the forest, trips and falls down the hill, and everyone at the party assumes that she has gone home, when in fact she's broken her ankle and is now stuck in the middle of the Smoky Mountains. It's very, very short, and the main character has this incredible resilience that really gets her through the story, because she's very determined to not be in the situation that she is in, and do everything that she can to get out of it. So this Be Not Far From Me. Another YA book that I loved from 2020 is actually translated from Portuguese. It's called Where We Go From Here by Lucas Roja. And I don't have the translator's name on the, see if I have it here. Oh, it's translated from Portuguese by Larissa Helena. And it tells the story of 3 young men in Brazil who are navigating their relationships with each other and also their relationships with HIV. So one of them has just received a positive HIV test. One of them has HIV and is living with kind of the repercussions and stigma around having HIV, and then one of them has received a negative HIV test. And all of their lives intertwine and connect around one of their positive tests. So it's this beautiful, beautiful novel. A lot of novels about HIV and AIDS are set in the 80s, and this is set in modern day. So it really shows the effect of HIV and AIDS in today's world in a way that many books don't. And also it's a really beautiful love and friendship story. I'd highly recommend it. An adult novel that I read, it's actually a novella. It's called To Be Taught If Fortunate by Becky Chambers. She's written other adult sci-fi novels. I think she's most famous for one called The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. But this is a novella told from the perspective of an astronaut who is on an extrasolar mission to just kind of explore other worlds. And the way that the kind of science around it is set up is that I think there's 5 or 6 astronauts that are on this space station or spaceship, and they're traveling to different planets and exploring them to send research information back to Earth. But obviously it takes a very long time to travel in between different planets. And so the astronauts go into this sort of like cryo-freeze situation, but they wake up as a different person every time. So their consciousness is the same, but their physical body is different. And I haven't read it recently enough. I read it over the summer. I haven't read it recently enough to remember how the science of that actually works, but it made a lot of sense at the time when I was reading it. So it's just this little vignette of this one astronaut and her, relationships with her crewmates, her relationship with being so far from Earth, and being so far from connection. Shortly after the novel starts, the astronauts realize that they haven't received any communication from Earth in a long time, and they're start to get kind of concerned about it. And then they get a message from Earth saying, "We've cut your funding, have fun." So it's a really interesting kind of, it's not even really about the survival aspect of like, you're in space and NASA has cut your funding, so good luck. But it's really more about the relationships that the astronaut forms with her crewmates and the different planets that they visit. Highly recommend it. One of the rereads that I did was a 4-book series called The Monstrumologist, and I listened to them on audio, and my favorite of this series is the 3rd one called The Isle of Blood. And the series is about a young man named Will Henry, which is also my dog's name, who is apprenticed to a monster hunter and a scientist. And it's incredibly dark, really, really dark, gritty, violent horror. But it's also about human transformation and the transformation of this character, as well as the doctor that he works with. So this is my favorite one. If you decide to read the series, it's something that you have to read all 4 books. Like, it's not a series where you read the first one and you like it and it's okay. Maybe you'll read the later ones. The series builds on itself so much. And by the time you get to the 4th book, it's really just incredible how the author was able to weave the transformation of the characters throughout the entire series. It's really just one giant book, if you think about it. And then my top 3 books of 2020, drum roll please, was The Bear. This is an adult novel, but it's easily accessible, I would say, by middle school and high school students as well. It's a cautionary tale. It's very short, about a girl and her father. They don't have names. You never find out their names. Living in a post-civilization world that's basically calm and Edenic. The father teaches his daughter things every day, like fishing or how to build a bow and arrow, how to craft a bow and arrow, how to extract salt from trees or dew, reading the stars. And as far as they or you as the reader are aware, they're the last two humans on Earth. And the father knows that he's not going to be around forever and has to teach his daughter everything that he can so that when he's gone, she can still survive. And it's beautifully written, and there's this lovely imagery of a bear all throughout the story, which obviously appeals to me. I love bears, and I love stories like this. And so this was really like one of the perfect reads for me in 2020. The second best book I read in 2020 was called The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. It's also an adult novel. It's kind of a creeping, slow burn sort of horror story that kind of starts building immediately after the first sentence and doesn't let up until the very end of the book. And it surrounds the Native American mythology around a mythological creature called the Deer Woman. And it also focuses on some childhood friends that are reuniting as adults to kind of live with a mistake that they made as kids. It's incredible. And then the best book I read last year should probably come as no surprise to anybody who knows me. Daniel Kraus's epic, The Living Dead. So Daniel Kraus is my favorite author, and he was invited to collaborate posthumously with George A. Romero, who's kind of the father of modern horror and the father of zombies, on this novel that George Romero started before he died. So it is, if you know George Romero, you know Night of the Living Dead, Day of the Living Dead, all of those zombie movies are interconnected, and this book is not directly connected to those novels, though there are many, many Easter eggs, or those movies, though there are many, many Easter eggs in the novel that nod to the book, that nod to the movies. But it is a zombie epic survival story that starts on the day that the first body rises, but continues through the zombie uprising. And one of the many themes in George Romero's movies is that a zombie epidemic is not something that we ever kind of beat or get over. They just kind of take over, and we try and make our own little existence on the side. And this book really explores that. The second half of the book is all kind of about the afterward of the aftermath of surviving a zombie pandemic. And reading this novel during a pandemic was incredible. To see the ways that the characters in the book deal with this pandemic, that's obviously very different from the pandemic that we're experiencing, but still resonated very much with the pandemic that we experienced. It's an incredible novel. I recommend it very, very highly, and also everything else that Daniel Kraus has written. So those are my top, I think it was 9 books of 2020. I hope you enjoy them.
Yeah, I read The Only Good Indians like 2 or 3 months ago.
Yeah.
Really good. I think I remember on the jacket or on the back cover, they compared it to like Jordan Peele's horror movies.
Yes, for sure. For sure.
I think I read that quote like after I'd finished the book, and I was like, oh, that makes total sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's got a very like Get Out kind of vibe to it.
Yeah. And kind of combining like race and culture, kind of classic horror, and bringing it into like the modern day, which I thought was really cool.
It actually referenced at the end, one of the books that he referenced as like source material is this anthology of Native comics called The Deer Woman, which I ended up tracking down through Interlibrary Loan because it's like an indie publisher, very small release for this book, but it's a collection of comics about this Deer Woman mythology, and I become super interested in it. It's a really fascinating piece of mythology that I didn't know about.
I love how ours could not be more different next to each other. I love that Emily and I are next to each other, and ours could not be more different because I could not read a horror novel if you paid me to read a horror novel, let alone during the pandemic. All of my reads are very sweet and cozy and heartwarming in the sense that I definitely was not able to read any kind of downer books during the pandemic. I also have most of these on audio, or we have most of these on audio as a library. So that has also been one of my big trends for 2020 is reading things in audio format, because I just feel that I have not been able to concentrate on reading print books as much during all of this. So audios have been a real lifesaver. I promised myself that I would not talk about any more picture books because my best books videos are all picture books, but there's one picture book that I didn't do in my best book video. So I have to do one picture book today, which is There Must Be More Than That, which is a fantastic picture book. It's really recent 2020 release by Shinshuki Yoshitaki. And that author has also done I Can Be Anything, which we also own and is a fantastic other book. But this one is great because it's a great pandemic read in the sense that the characters are a little brother and his baby sister, and the little brother thinks it's funny, and I'm sure anybody with siblings relates. The little brother thinks that it's funny to tell his sister that there's only really horrible things out in the grown-up world, like war and death and disease, and the little sister of course gets so freaked out and scared and runs to her grandma and asks grandma if that's true, and grandma responds in this really beautiful way about how there are dark things in the world, but there's also a lot more than that. And there are a lot of really hopeful futures for all of us. So that one's a really great pandemic read, especially if you're feeling a little bit down and need some hope. But that's my only picture book that I'm going to talk about. I am constraining myself. I've also done a lot of rereads this year. So I reread the Betsy Tacy series by Maud Hart Lovelace. It's an older one from the 1900s, and it's a great family read. It's just a real slice of life, a lot of different aged characters. At the beginning of the book, they're 4, and then by the end of the book, if you read the whole series, by the end of the book, they're grown-ups. But if you only read the first few, they're still littles. They're still, I think, 8 in the third book. The first 3 are kind of more of a trilogy than the remaining books. The remaining books are more focused, especially on Betsy, but they're also really good. But we reread the first 3, which are all the kiddo books, and they're just small, the kind of adventures that kids get into and the kind of things that matter to kids, just small adventures, and the kind of pretend play is a real big aspect of those books. So those are really heartwarming and cozy. I also read for the very first time, it's a very old book. It's a similar book to Betsy Tacy, similar time period, but I have never read it before, the All of a Kind Family series by Sydney Taylor. I read all of those books this year, all as audios on Hoopla, and those are really, really fantastic. They've got some great Jewish representation during turn of the century America, and it's also a family with a lot of differently aged children, so there's all different kinds of things going on with the family. So that's another really cozy read that I loved. I also did on audio a more modern book, another book that came out in 2020, Stand Up Yumi Chung, which is about a girl who really, really wants to do stand-up and perform, but her family isn't super supportive of that. So she takes the place of someone that is not at a summer camp. There's a summer camp for performing arts, for comedy performing arts, and they think that she is another student that hasn't showed up to the camp, and she doesn't correct them so that she's able to go to the camp for free and not tell her parents about it. That one's a really fantastic one, and the grown-ups in that book are really supportive in the end, so you don't need to worry too much. They're a little bit unsupportive at the very beginning, but not throughout the whole novel. There's a real reconciliation with them and with Yumi at the end. That one's also a really great one on audio. I also read at the very beginning of 2020 an older book. I think this one came out during 2019, The Adventures of a Girl Called Bicycle. I loved that book. It's kind of a strange book. It's realistic fiction, but also very much stretching the boundaries of realistic fiction because there's a silliness to it. It's all about a girl who takes a bike ride all the way from Washington, D.C. to San Francisco in order to meet her bike riding hero in San Francisco, and against the wishes of her grown-ups. She's being raised at a nunnery, and her grown-ups do not want her to leave, let alone to leave cross-country on a bicycle. So that one is all about the people that she meets along the way and the friends that she makes and what she discovers about herself. Also just a really pure, happy read. There's a couple of moments where you're a little bit worried for her, but everything turns out okay in that one as well. The only grown-up books that I usually read, I sometimes read grown-up fiction, but I normally only read grown-up nonfiction. So I had some really good nonfiction this year. One is a memoir, a grown-up memoir called Sitting Pretty, which is by Rebecca Tressing. And that one is a memoir about, she is both a wheelchair user and a disability studies professor. So it's all about the experience of being disabled in America and also the historical perspective and the academic perspective of what it's like to be disabled and what the kind of stigmas and misperceptions and hatred that is pushed onto people who are in that community, and what she's experienced personally, and then also what she knows from an academic perspective from studying it and teaching it. That one is really good, and a little bit of a downer. Yes, there are definitely sad moments, but ultimately really hopeful and really emotional. The other nonfiction that I did for grownups is another memoir type of book. It's called Big Friendship, and that one's by Aminatou Sow and Anne Friedman. They're real life best friends. They host a podcast called Call Your Girlfriend, which is really, really great. And they have been writing this book for several years now. It's finally came out this year. And it's all about how they have kept their friendship alive over decades. They've been friends for quite some time, and they met in New York and were living together in New York, but then one of them took a job in California. And so it's also about navigating that far apart friendship, which I think was really resonant during the pandemic, especially. I read that one with my best friend, who also, we have a cross-country friendship. She's in Seattle and I'm here in Chicago. So it was nice to read it with a friend who's going through the same experience that our friendship has gone through. And also the podcast is so amazing that we knew the book was going to be amazing. So that's another really quick read. It's short, and it's short chapters too. And you can get through it really easily, but it also really leaves you with a lot of things to think about how our culture values romantic relationships more than it values friendship, and how to make space for friendship in our lives and in our society. So that one is also a really great one to pick up and read.
Awesome. All right.